Hello, more dry stuff, I'm afraid. It's about the planning system again. As I discussed a few days ago, changes to the British planning system are coming. And thinking about it, there are fundamental issues about how planning interacts with land value and property rights. I'm going to go into those a bit. Let's start off by looking at land value. In a previous video, I discussed why some land is more valuable than others. That's explained in Ricardo's law of rent. But why land has a value at all is a different question. All land value is created and sustained by a government in some form or other. We just take it for granted that that's the way things are. But what does a government have to do to maintain this land value? Well, first of all, it's got to defend the realm with hardware like this. The next thing it's got to do is to protect property rights through the agent of the law enforcement system, the courts, and so on. Without that, land wouldn't have any value. You couldn't defend your rights. Government also provides the infrastructure that makes the land usable. Here's the tube. This is West Finchley. Without the tube, West Finchley would still be open fields. In fact, London wouldn't work at all without underground railways. It was the first city in the world to have one, the Metropolitan. Here it is, still going strong since 1863. And then, to keep the wheels of commerce and industry running, there's got to be infrastructure of all sorts, roads and railways. There's more. The land's got to be protected against the forces of nature through things like flood protection. This is the Thames, and this is the Thames Barrier. If that failed and the London Underground was flooded, London would pretty much come to a standstill for a long time. It would take months, if not years, to recover. There's more about land value. We think that the value of land is its price. That isn't the case. It's a derivative value. The true value of land is its rental value. Last year's crop pays the rent. When you buy a piece of land, you're buying future crops. There's an old saying that 20 years harvest buys the field. Rental value doesn't exist of itself and for all time. It has to be constantly sustained, mostly by government action. Those destroyers have got to be ready all the time in case of some risk from an enemy outside, at least in theory. So government has to renew continually the legal and physical infrastructure that makes the land usable. This is just the railways. This sort of damage happens regularly. That will have to be repaired if the line is to be up and running again. Infrastructure also has to be upgraded. The climate is certainly changing. We seem to be getting more serious storms. Perhaps the sea level is rising. There's a very exposed stretch of railway along the coast of Devon, which has regularly been damaged when the weather's been severe. Here's the damage which occurred in 2014. The line was completely washed away. Then an Orange Army was sent in, which worked for 3 months to get the line open again. And this is the new seawall, which will be more resistant than the old one, and with luck it might keep the system going for another 50 years. There's an irony here because it was the big local landowner who prevented the railway company from building an inland route in the 1840s. That's why the railway runs along the coast on the scenic route. Very attractive if you're on the train, I have to say, but it wasn't what was intended. The next thing I'm going to say is going to make us feel uncomfortable. We don't own land in the way that we own our clothes. We own a land title, which is a document that's issued by government and guaranteed by the government, which gives you rights over a piece of land. And sometimes things go wrong. A country can be invaded, in which case the land titles may be worthless. There might be a revolution. If you've read Dr. Zhivago, it explains what happened in 1917 when the old land rights were set aside and considered worthless. It's happened in Zimbabwe, it's happening in South Africa. So we shouldn't really take it for granted that the government will protect our land rights. Not necessarily the case. And those land rights are restricted under common law and by planning controls. You can't build whatever you like on your land. In a way then, land ownership's an illusion. It's a legal convenience is the best way of thinking about it. Uncomfortable idea, isn't it? Here we are, this is what land ownership needs at times. People have got to fight for their country. Let's come back to planning. Why do we have it at all? The reason, well, there's always been planning, but the planning system which was established in 1947 was a reaction to the sprawl that had happened between the wars. It was pretty much uncontrolled, and you got ribbon development along the new main roads that were being built in the 30s especially. After the war, there was a feeling we don't want the whole country covered with little brick houses, and planning regulations were introduced. The difficulty with planning is that it profoundly affects the value of land. There's another old saying, the most valuable crop a farmer can ever grow is the crop of houses. But if there's planning control, the farmer or the owner of the farmland has to get permission. Once that permission is given, the value rises hugely. The 1947 Act introduced what they call development charges, which was payment for the consent. The predictable effect of that was a land famine, and the Conservatives, who were re-elected in 1951, got rid of that very quickly. The limitation of a system of planning where there's no financial linkage of any kind is that planning can't make things happen. A council can only allow something to happen, but it doesn't necessarily happen. There's this site in Brighton which has been vacant since 1986. Here it is with its planning consent. It's always had planning consent most of the 34 years. The planning reforms described in the white paper issued in August are not going to achieve much in the way of positive planning, I would predict. The zoning system will simply encourage land hoarding. It certainly won't do anything to prevent it. And the community infrastructure levy is just another development tax, and it will tend to make people defer the event which will trigger the payment. It's obvious this is going to happen. I think we can reasonably rate the proposals as a miss. If we were going to design a planning system with effective financial teeth, it would have to bear in mind these four things. Planning consent does not create land value. It releases a latent value which already exists. Number two, special importance should not be given to increases in land value which follow certain arbitrarily chosen dates or events, such as grants of planning consent, or if the owner dies, or you're measuring an increase in land value from some date or other. All land value now and in the future is due to the presence and continuing activities of the community. The Navy and Air Force have got to be on patrol. The flood defences have got to be manned. From this it follows that all ad hoc taxes on land value, whether they're taxes on capital gains, death, or planning decisions, are wrong in principle. We shouldn't be thinking about them. The fourth and final conclusion is that land should be taxed on its current rental value based on what it can legally be used for. The tax should be regular, it should be ongoing, it should reflect the advantages that the owner enjoys, and we need to bear in mind that these are mostly at the cost of the taxpayer who protects the land title and provides the benefits that the landowner enjoys. And this is at the core of the argument for land value taxation.